I didn't plan on becoming someone's hostage. Hell, I didn't even plan on leaving my apartment that morning. But life's funny that way, it'll serve you terror with a side of romance when you least expect it. The first time I saw him, he was pointing a gun at a bank teller. His voice low and commanding. His mask unable to hide the ice in his eyes. The second time I saw him, those same eyes were locked on meth idiot standing frozen by the exit door, making me his problem. Adrian. That was his name. Dangerous. Cold-blooded. The kind of man your mother warns you about. The kind of man who should have killed me to tie up loose ends. But instead, he pulled me into the getaway car, shoved me against the leather seat, and told me with a voice rough like gravel, "You're coming with me." And God help me, didn't know whether I should beg for my life or keep staring at him like a moth hypnotized by flame. The city blurred by outside the windows. Sirens wailing somewhere in the distance. My heart hammered against my ribs. Every instinct screaming at me to run, to fight, to escape. But when I turned my head, I saw him. Adrian. His mask now off. Tossed aside casually as if he didn't fear consequences. He was beautiful. Brutally. Dangerously beautiful. Black hair fell across his forehead. His blue eyes sharp as ice yet softened by some unspoken torment. His lips pressed together in a line that suggested he tasted too much of life's bitterness. "Why didn't you kill me?" I asked before my brain could catch up with my mouth. Adrian glanced at me, one eyebrow lifting, and for the briefest second, a flicker of amusement broke through his hardened mask. Maybe I don't like wasting things that catch my attention. It was a ridiculous answer. It made no sense. But somehow, it was worse than a threat. Because now, I wasn't just a witness, I was his choice. The hideout was nothing like I expected. Not some dark, dingy warehouse, but an apartment overlooking the Hudson River. Floor-to-ceiling windows, minimalist furniture, and silence so sharp it rang in my ears. It smelled faintly of gunpowder and coffee. He pushed me inside, but not violently. More like he was ushering me into his world, daring me to leave but knowing I wouldn't. "You stay here," Adrian said, tossing his jacket onto the couch. "Try to run, and I'll find you. Try to scream, and you won't like the result." I should have hated him. I should have been plotting my escape. Instead, I found myself watching the way his hands trembled when he lit a cigarette. How he leaned against the counter with a weariness that didn't belong to a man who'd just pulled off a robbery. "What do you want from me?" I asked softly. He looked at me then, really looked at me, as if peeling me open layer by layer. And in that moment, I realized he wasn't just holding me captive. He was clinging to me. Days blurred into nights. I wasn't locked in a cell, but in his presence. He'd let me roam the apartment, even sit by the window to watch the city lights flicker like fireflies. Sometimes, we ate in silence. Sometimes, he asked me questions that felt too sharp, too personal. "What's your name?" "Ethan." "Ethan," he repeated, letting the syllables roll off his tongue like he was tasting them. Figures. Figures. What the hell did that mean? And then one night, after the city fell quiet, I found him sitting on the couch, his gun dismantled on the table, his hands running over the pieces like they were old friends. His shoulders slumped, eyes distant, lost. I should have been afraid. But instead, I sat next to him, close enough that our knees brushed. You don't have to do this. You know, I whispered. You don't have to be this. Adrian laughed. But it wasn't cruel. It was hollow. What do you know about what I have to be? I know you didn't kill me. That shut him up. His jaw tightened, his fingers stilling. He turned to me slowly, blue eyes burning with something raw, something dangerous. And before I could stop myself, I reached out, covering his hand with mine. His skin was warm, trembling, not from rage, from exhaustion, from loneliness. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. And then, like a storm breaking, his hand flipped and gripped mine tightly, like he was drowning and I was the only thing keeping him afloat. That was the first time Adrian let his walls crack. The first time I saw not the ringleader, not the criminal, but the man beneath. And maybe I was insane. Maybe it was Stockholm Syndrome. But I couldn't stop the way my chest ached when I looked at him. The way I wanted to soothe the pain etched into his every gesture. The world would call him a monster. But sitting there, holding his hand in the quiet glow of the city lights, I realized monsters don't always wear claws. Sometimes, they wear loneliness. And sometimes, against all odds, they find someone who dares to touch them anyway. The sirens had faded days ago, but their echo still lingered in my chest. Outside the tall glass windows, Manhattan sparkled like it always did, unaware that inside Adrian's apartment, two lives hung in the balance: his, hunted by the law, and mine, chained to him by choice I hadn't meant to make. The line between prisoner and confidant blurred faster than I wanted to admit. He never tied me up, never locked the door. Yet every time I thought about running, I saw the weight in his eyes, and something in me refused to leave. One night, I found him standing on the balcony, cigarette smoke curling into the cold night air. His jaw was tight, his hands restless, like he was preparing for war with himself. You should go, Adrian muttered without turning to me. The words stabbed deeper than any knife. You're letting me leave. He exhaled smoke, bitter and broken. I should have never dragged you into this. The cops will come eventually. And when they do, I don't want you near me. I stepped closer, until the night air wrapped both of us. My voice cracked but held steady. If you wanted me gone, you would have let me walk away on day one. Don't pretend this isn't about me anymore. His shoulders stiffened, and when he turned, I saw it: fear. Not of the police, not of death, but of losing something he'd never thought he could have. The next morning, everything shattered. We were eating breakfast, burnt toast and black coffee, when the glass door exploded inward. Armed men in tactical gear stormed in, shouting commands, their rifles pointed straight at Adrian. I froze. My blood turned to ice. Adrian's instincts kicked in fast. He shoved me behind him, drawing his gun, eyes wild but sharp. The world spun in chaos, boots pounding. Orders screamed, gunmetal gleaming under the light. Drop the weapon. Someone barked. Adrian didn't move. His finger hovered near the trigger, his body shielding mine. For a moment, I thought he'd go down fighting, the outlaw written in his bones, refusing to surrender. But then his gaze flicked to me just 1 second. But it was enough. I saw it in his eyes. The choice. The sacrifice. Slowly, he lowered the gun and let it clatter to the floor. The trial was a circus. Cameras flashing. reporters clawing for every detail. The city painting Adrian as nothing more than a monster in a leather jacket. I sat in the courtroom, hands shaking, throat tight. I wasn't supposed to be there. I wasn't supposed to care. But when his eyes found mine across the room, I knew. No chains could sever what had grown between us. The prosecutor demanded decades in prison. The judge's gavel felt like a death sentence. But even as they led him away in cuffs, Adrian kept looking at me, blue eyes soft, almost at peace. And that was the worst part. He wasn't fighting for freedom anymore. He was only fighting to keep me safe. Weeks crawled by. I tried to go back to normal life classes, coffee shops, nights alone staring at the ceiling, but nothing fit anymore. The world felt empty, drained of color, because the man who had terrified and protected me in equal measure was gone. Until one rainy evening, when I found a letter slipped under my door. No return address. Just my name scrawled in handwriting I knew too well. Ethan. It read, "You should hate me. Maybe part of you does. But I need you to know if there's one good thing I did in this life. It was not pulling the trigger that night in the bank. Because if I had, I never would have known what it felt like to be seen, to be touched without flinching, to be wanted for something other than power. Don't wait for me. You deserve light, not chains." Tears blurred the words. I pressed the paper to my chest, knowing he thought this was goodbye. But I wasn't ready to let him vanish into the shadows. Months later, I drove 5 hours to a federal prison in upstate New York. The guard checked my ID, gave me a long look, and finally led me through sterile halls to a visitation room. He was there, older somehow, even though barely any time had passed. His black hair shorter, his face leaner, but his eyes the same piercing blue that had undone me from the beginning. When he saw me, his lips parted in disbelief. "You shouldn't be here," Adrian said hoarsely. "Yeah, well," I shot back, fighting the lump in my throat. "You don't get to decide that anymore." We sat across from each other, the cold metal table between us. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. And then, slowly, I reached across, my hand open. He hesitated, glancing at the guards. But then his fingers slid into mine, rough and trembling. The world might still call him a monster. But to me, he was Adrian, the man who had chosen not to kill me. The man who had chosen, against every instinct, to love me instead. Years pass differently when you're waiting for someone. I visited as often as they allowed, each time peeling back more of his armor, learning the fragments of his past he'd never told another soul. And though steel bars and concrete walls tried to cage him, our bond refused to be broken. The day of his release, the sky was painted gold with morning light. I waited outside those gates, heart in my throat, hands clenched so tightly they ached. And then he appeared. No chains, no guards, just him. Adrian. For a second, we just stared at each other, like we couldn't believe this was real. Then he dropped the duffel bag in his hand, and I ran. When his arms closed around me, it wasn't desperate like before. It was steady, strong, filled with a promise that no cell could erase. "You came back," he whispered into my hair. "I never left," I whispered back. "They say some loves are doomed from the start. But ours, born in gunfire and fear, carved through loneliness and pain, proved them wrong." Because love isn't always about perfect beginnings. Sometimes, it's about surviving the storm together. And as Adrian and I walked out of that place hand in hand, the world finally felt like it belonged to us. Not the hostage and the criminal. Not the witness and the outlaw. Just two men. Broken. Mended. And whole because we had found each other. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe to stay updated with the latest videos.